Before Java 8, whenever you needed to pass behavior to a method, like what a thread should do, or how to sort a list, you had to write an anonymous class. That meant writing new interface name, open and close parentheses, curly braces, the @sign override annotation, the method signature, then finally your one line of actual logic. 6 or 7 lines just to say one thing. It was repetitive and cluttered. Lambda expressions cut through all that ceremony. A lambda is simply parameters, arrow, body. That is the entire syntax. You are saying, here is a small piece of behavior, use it wherever you need it. No class name, no method name, no access modifier. Just the logic. The arrow token is the separator between what goes in and what happens. If there are no parameters, you write empty parentheses then arrow. If there is exactly one parameter, you can skip the parentheses entirely. If the body is a single expression, you skip the curly braces and the return keyword, the expression's value is returned automatically. If the body needs multiple lines, you wrap it in curly braces like a normal method. Lambdas do not exist in isolation, they only make sense in the context of a functional interface, which we will see next. But the key insight is that lambdas let you treat behavior as a value. You can store a lambda in a variable, pass it to a method, and return it from a method, just like you would with a string or an integer. When this program runs, execution starts from the main method inside the main class. The program demonstrates 3 different uses of lambda expressions in Java, and each one is handled one after the other in sequence. The first part deals with a lambda that takes no parameters. The line runnable greet equals a lambda that calls system.out.println of hello from lambda defines a lambda expression and assigns it to a runnable reference variable called greet. Runnable is a functional interface that has a single abstract method called run. The lambda expression provides the implementation of that run method directly. When greet.run is called on the next line, the lambda body executes and prints hello from lambda to the console. The second part creates an array list of strings called names. 3 names are added to it one by one using the add method. Charlie is added first, then Elise, then Bob. Next, collections.sort is called with the names list and a lambda expression that acts as a comparator. The lambda takes 2 parameters a and b, and returns the result of a dot compare to b. This tells the sort method how to compare 2 strings alphabetically, so the list gets sorted into Elise, Bob, Charlie. The print statement then outputs sorted : open square bracket Elise, Bob, Charlie close square bracket. The third part uses the foreach method on the names list. A lambda is passed that takes one parameter called name and uses a block body with curly braces since it has multiple statements. Inside the block, each name is converted to uppercase using uppercase and stored in a variable called upper, which is then printed. Since for each iterates in order, Elise is printed first, then Bob, then Charlie. After all 3 parts finish executing, the main method ends and the program terminates. A lambda expression needs something to anchor it to, a type. When you write a lambda and assign it to a variable, Java needs to know what type that variable is. The answer is always a functional interface. A lambda is the implementation of the single abstract method of a functional interface. Any interface with exactly one abstract method qualifies as a functional interface, even old ones like runnable and comparator. The @sign functional interface annotation is optional but strongly recommended. It tells the compiler, enforce that this interface has exactly one abstract method. If someone accidentally adds a second abstract method, the compiler immediately gives an error. Java 8 introduced 4 core functional interfaces that cover most use cases. Predicate takes a value and returns a boolean. Use it for testing conditions, filtering data. Function takes a value of one type and returns a value of another type. Use it for transformations. Consumer takes a value and returns nothing. Use it when you want to do something with a value like print it or save it. Supplier takes nothing and returns a value. Use it when you need to generate or provide a value on demand. These four interfaces are the building blocks of the entire Stream API, which we will see shortly. When this program runs, execution starts from the main method inside the main class. The program demonstrates four built-in functional interfaces in Java, which are predicate, function, consumer, and supplier, each used with a lambda expression. The first part uses a predicate. A predicate takes an input and returns either true or false. Here, a predicate of string called isLong is defined with a lambda that checks if the length of the string s is greater than 5. When isLong.test is called with high, the length is to which is not greater than 5, so it prints false. When called with hello world, the length is 11, which is greater than 5, so it prints true. The second part uses a function. A function takes an input and returns an output of a possibly different type. Here, a function of string and integer called getLength is defined with a lambda that returns the length of the string s. When getLength.apply is called with lambda, the length is 6, so it prints 6. The third part uses a consumer. A consumer takes an input and performs an action on it but returns nothing. Here, a consumer of string called printer is defined with a lambda that prints value followed by the input string. When printer.accept is called with Java 8, it prints value Java 8. The fourth part uses a supplier. A supplier takes no input and simply supplies or returns a value. Here, a supplier of double called random is defined with a lambda that returns math.random, which generates a random decimal number between 0 and 1. When random.get is called, it retrieves that value and prints random followed by the generated number, which varies every time the program runs. After all four parts finish executing, the main method ends and the program terminates. Method references are not a new feature on top of lambdas. They are simply a more readable way to write a lambda when all the lambda does is call a single existing method. Instead of writing the parameter and the method call explicitly, you point directly to the method using the double colon operator. A static method reference points to a static method of a class, like integer :parseInt instead of s arrow integer .parseInt open parenthesis s close parenthesis. An instance method reference on a specific object points to a method on a particular pre-existing object. System.out : println means call println on this specific system.out object. The lambda form would be s arrow system.out.println open parenthesis s close parenthesis. An instance method reference on an arbitrary object is used when the parameter itself is the object the method is called on. String : uppercase means, for whatever string is passed as the argument, call its uppercase. The lambda form would be s arrow s.uppercase. A constructor reference uses the new keyword after the class name new. It creates a new instance of the class using whatever parameter is passed. This is used heavily with streams when transforming elements into new objects. When this program runs, execution starts from the main method inside the main class. The program demonstrates four different types of method references in Java, which are a shorter and cleaner way to write lambda expressions when a lambda simply calls an existing method. The first part creates a list of strings called numbers containing 1, 2, and 3 as string values. A stream is created on this list and the map operation is applied using integer :parseInt as a static method reference. This means for each string element in the list, the parseInt method of the integer class is called to convert it into an integer. Then for each with system.out::println prints each converted integer. So 1, 2, and 3 are printed on separate lines. The second part creates a list of strings called names containing Alice, Bob, and Charlie. The forEach method is called on names with system.out::println as an instance method reference on a specific object, which is the standard output stream. This simply prints each name in the list on a separate line, so Alice, Bob, and Charlie are printed one after the other. The third part calls forEach on names again, but this time passes main::greet as a method reference. This refers to the static greet method defined in the main class itself. For each name in the list, the greet method is called, which prints hello followed by the name. So hello Alice, hello Bob, and hello Charlie are printed on separate lines. The fourth part creates a new list called upper by streaming the names list and applying string::uppercase as an instance method reference on an arbitrary object. This means uppercase is called on each individual string element in the stream. The results are collected into a new list using collectors.toList. Finally, the upper list is printed, which outputs open square bracket Alice, Bob, Charlie, close square bracket. After all four parts finish executing, the main method ends and the program terminates. Before streams, processing a list meant writing for loops, if statements, temporary variables to collect results, and sorting calls scattered throughout. Streams replace all of that with a clean pipeline where you describe what you want step by step, and Java figures out how to execute it efficiently. A stream pipeline has three parts. First, a source. You call .stream on any collection to get a stream of its elements. Second, zero or more intermediate operations that transform the stream. Filter keeps only elements matching a condition. Map transforms each element into something else. Sorted sorts them. Distinct removes duplicates. Each intermediate operation returns a new stream. The crucial property is that they are lazy. Calling filter does not actually do anything yet. No elements are examined. Third, a terminal operation triggers the entire pipeline at once. When you write .collect or .forEach or .count at the end, Java activates all the lazy intermediate operations and processes the data in one pass. After the terminal operation, the stream is consumed and cannot be used again. This lazy evaluation is powerful because Java can optimize the pipeline. For example, if you have filter followed by find first, Java stops as soon as it finds the first matching element without processing the rest of the data. When this program runs, execution starts from the main method inside the main class. The program demonstrates four different stream operations in Java, combining intermediate and terminal operations in different ways. The first part creates a list of integers called numbers containing 5, 2, 8, 1, 9, 3, 7, 4, and 6. A stream is created on this list and two intermediate operations are applied one after the other. First, filter is applied with a lambda that keeps only those numbers where n is greater than 4. This gives 5, 8, 9, 7, and 6. Then sorted is applied, which arranges these in ascending order giving 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Finally, the terminal operation collect with collectors.toList gathers these into a new list called result. The print statement outputs filtered and sorted open square bracket 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 close square bracket. The second part creates a list of strings called names containing Alice, Bob, and Charlie all in lowercase. A stream is created and the map operation is applied using string::uppercase as a method reference, which converts each name to uppercase. The results are collected into a new list called upper. The print statement outputs uppercase colon open square bracket Alice comma Bob comma Charlie close square bracket. The third part creates a new stream on the numbers list and applies filter with a lambda that keeps only even numbers, meaning those where n modulo 2 equals 0. The even numbers in the list are 2, 8, 4, and 6, which makes 4 even numbers in total. The terminal operation count counts them and stores the result in a long variable called count. The print statement outputs even count colon 4. The fourth part creates another stream on the numbers list and applies the reduce terminal operation. Reduce takes two arguments, a starting value of 0 and a lambda that adds a and b together. It combines all elements one by one starting from 0, accumulating the total sum of all numbers in the list. The final result is stored in an int variable called sum. The print statement outputs sum colon 45. After all four parts finish executing, the main method ends and the program terminates. Think of a stream pipeline like an assembly line in a factory. Intermediate operations are the workstations on the line. Each one does something to the item passing through and passes it to the next station. Terminal operations are the shipping dock, the point at which the finished product leaves the factory and the line stops. Intermediate operations are lazy because setting up workstations does not manufacture anything. Only when a product needs to leave through the shipping dock, the terminal operation, does the factory actually start running and items start moving through the stations. The most commonly used intermediate operations are filter and map. Filter is like a quality check station that rejects items not meeting criteria. Map is a transformation station that changes the form of each item, maybe converting a string to its length or a name to an uppercase version. Flat map is more advanced. It is used when each element produces multiple elements. For example, if each person has a list of phone numbers, FlatMap flattens all those individual lists into one single stream of all phone numbers across all people. On the terminal side, Collect is the most versatile. Combined with collectors, it can gather stream elements into a list, a set, a map, or even group them by a property. Reduce combines all elements into one value by repeatedly applying an operation, sum, product, concatenation, maximum. Any match, all match, and none match are short-circuit operations. They stop processing as soon as the answer is determined. Null pointer exception is famously called the billion-dollar mistake by its inventor because null references have caused incalculable bugs, crashes, and security issues over the decades. The root problem is that null is invisible. A variable can silently hold null and the program crashes only when you try to use it, sometimes far from where null was assigned. Optional makes absence visible. Instead of returning null from a method when there is no result, you return an optional that is either full, containing a value, or empty, explicitly representing absence. The caller is then forced to deal with both possibilities through the optional API, rather than silently assuming a value is always present. Or else is the most practical method. It returns the contained value if present, or a default value if the optional is empty. No null check needed. Or else it takes a supplier instead of a direct value, useful when the default value is expensive to compute, because the supplier is only called when the optional is actually empty. If present takes a consumer and runs it only if the value is present, no if statement, no null check. Map on an optional transforms the contained value if present, returning a new optional of the transformed value. If the optional is empty, map returns an empty optional without errors. The important rule, never call get on an optional without first checking is present. That defeats the entire purpose. Use or else or if present patterns instead. When this program runs, execution starts from the main method inside the main class. The program demonstrates how optional works in Java as a way to handle values that may or may not be present, avoiding null pointer exceptions. The first part calls the findUser method twice. When findUser is called with the ID 1, the condition inside the method is true, so it returns optional dot of alias, which wraps the string alias inside an optional. This is stored in a variable called eduser1. When findUser is called with the ID 99, the condition is false, so it returns optional dot empty, meaning an optional with no value inside. This is stored in a variable called eduser2. Next, user1.isPresent is called, and since user1 contains a value, it returns true and prints true. Then user2.isPresent is called, and since user2 is empty, it returns false and prints false. After that, user1.get is called, which retrieves the actual value stored inside the optional. Since user1 contains alias, it prints alias. Then user2.orElse is called with the string guessed as the fallback value. Since user2 is empty and has no value, the fallback is used and it prints guessed. Next, user1.ifPresent is called with a lambda that prints hello followed by the name. Since user1 is present and contains alias, the lambda executes and prints hello alias. If user1 were empty, nothing would be printed. After that, the map operation is applied on user1 using string :length as a method reference. This transforms the optional of string into an optional of integer containing the length of the name alias, which is 5. This is stored in a variable called length. Then length.orElse with 0 as the fallback retrieves the value, and the print statement outputs name length:5. Finally, optional.ofNullable is called with null as the argument. This safely creates an optional from a value that could be null. Since null is passed, the result is an empty optional stored in nullsafe. When nullsafe.orElse is called with the string default, since there is no value present, the fallback is used and it prints default. After all operations finish executing, the main method ends and the program terminates. Before Java 8, interfaces were pure contracts, method signatures only, no bodies. This was clean but created a serious problem for library authors. If you shipped an interface as part of a public API and later realized you needed to add a method to it, every single class implementing that interface across every project using your library would immediately break at compile time. Adding a method to an interface was practically impossible without coordinating updates across all users. Default methods solved this completely. You can now add a new method to an interface with a full default implementation. All existing implementing classes automatically inherit this default behavior without any code changes. They do not even need to know the method was added. If a specific class wants different behavior, it can override the default method just like any other method. This is why the collections interface could gain new methods in Java 8, like forEach and stream and splitrator, without breaking the millions of existing classes implementing collection around the world. Static methods in interfaces are utility methods that logically belong with the interface but have no need to be overridden. They are called using the interface name directly, not through an implementing class or an object. This keeps utility logic organized with the interface it relates to. When this program runs, execution starts from the main method inside the main class. The program demonstrates how interfaces work in Java with abstract methods, default methods, and static methods, using two classes that implement the vehicle interface. The vehicle interface defines three methods. The first is start, which is an abstract method meaning it has no body and any class implementing this interface must provide its own implementation. The second is fuel type, which is a default method meaning it already has a body inside the interface itself. Classes that implement vehicle can either use this default implementation or override it with their own. The third is max speed, which is a static method that belongs to the interface itself and returns the integer value 200. The car class implements the vehicle interface and provides its own implementation of the start method, which prints car started. Since car does not override the fuel type method, it will use the default implementation provided by the vehicle interface. The electric car class also implements the vehicle interface and provides its own implementation of the start method, which prints electric car started. Unlike car, electric car also overrides the fuel type method with its own implementation that prints fuel:electric. In the main method, a car object called car is created first. When car.start is called, it executes the start method inside the car class and prints car started. When car.fuelType is called, since car does not have its own fuel type implementation, it falls back to the default method in the vehicle interface and prints default fuel:petrol. Next, an electric car object called EC is created. When EC.start is called, it executes the start method inside the electric car class and prints electric car started. When EC.fuelType is called, since electric car has its own overridden implementation, it uses that instead of the default and prints fuel:electric. Finally, vehicle.maxSpeed is called directly on the interface using the interface name, since maxSpeed is a static method. It returns 200 and the print statement outputs maxSpeed:200. After all operations finish executing, the main method ends and the program terminates. The old java.util.date and java.util.calendar classes were some of the most poorly designed APIs in Java's history. Date was mutable, meaning you could change a date object after creating it, which caused subtle bugs when objects were shared. Months were zero-indexed. January was month 0, causing off-by-win errors everywhere. Thread safety was non-existent. Time zone handling was confusing and error-prone. Most professional Java code relied on the third-party JodaTime library just to work with dates sanely. Java 8 replaced all of this with the java.time package, designed by the author of JodaTime. Every class is immutable. Operations like +days or -months never modify the original object. They return a new object. This makes datetime objects safe to share between threads and safe to store as constants. Local date, local time, and local datetime cover the common cases when you do not need time zone information. For a banking app processing transactions in a single country, local datetime is perfect. For a global scheduling app that needs to show the correct time to users in different countries, zone datetime with proper time zone IDs is the right choice. Duration measures time-based differences, how many hours and minutes between two local time values. Period measures date-based differences, how many years, months, and days between two local date values. These two are not interchangeable because calendar months have different lengths and leap years affect day counts. When this program runs, execution starts from the main method inside the main class. The program demonstrates how the Java Date and Time API works using local date, local datetime, duration, and period classes. The first part uses localDate.now to get the current date and stores it in a variable called today. Then localDate.of is called with the values 1995, 6, and 15 to create a specific date representing the 15th of June 1995, and it is stored in a variable called birthday. The print statements output today: 2026-0 to-28 and birthday: 1995-06-15. Next, period dot between is called with birthday and today as arguments. Period calculates the difference between two dates in terms of years, months, and days. The result is stored in a variable called age. Then age.getYears is called to extract only the years part from the period, and the print statement outputs age:30 years. After that, today.plusDays is called add with 7 to add 7 days to the current date. The result is stored in a variable called next week. Since today is 2026-0 to -28, adding 7 days gives 2026-03-07, and the print statement outputs next week: 2026-03-07. The next part uses local datetime.now to get the current date and time, including hours, minutes, and seconds, stored in a variable called now. Then plus hours with 3 and plus minutes with 30 are chained together on now to create a future date and time that is 3 hours and 30 minutes ahead, stored in a variable called future. Duration.between is then called with now and future to calculate the time difference between them. Duration works at the level of hours, minutes, and seconds, unlike period, which works at the level of dates. The result is stored in a variable called gap. Then gap.2minutes converts the entire duration into total minutes, which gives 210, since 3 hours and 30 minutes equals 210 minutes. The print statement outputs gap minutes:210. Next, today.iLeap year is called to check whether the current year 2026 is a leap year. Since 2026 is not a leap year, it returns false and the print statement outputs is leap year:false. Finally, today.getDayOfWeek is called to retrieve the day of the week for the current date. Since today is 2026-0 to -28, the day is Saturday, and the print statement outputs day of week:Saturday. After all operations finish executing, the main method ends and the program terminates. These 4 features span Java 10 through Java 17, and each one reduces boilerplate and improves the expressiveness of the language in a different way. The var keyword enables local variable type inference. Instead of writing the full type on the left and repeating the same type information on the right, you write var and let the compiler figure out the type from the right-hand side. The code is still statically typed. The compiler knows the exact type, it just saves you from writing it twice. Var only works for local variables inside methods, not for fields, method parameters, or return types. It is most useful when the type is obvious from context and long to type, like complex generic types. Switch expressions transform switch from a statement that causes side effects into an expression that returns a value. The arrow syntax replaces the old colon and break pattern. With arrow cases, there is no fall-through. Each case is completely independent. You can assign the result of a switch directly to a variable. This eliminates entire classes of bugs that came from forgetting a break statement in the old switch style. Records are the most impactful feature for data modeling. Every data class you write today has a constructor, private final fields, getters, equals, hash code, and toString, all manually written or generated. Records declare all of this in one line. You write record point open parenthesis int(x), int(y) close parenthesis, and Java generates everything automatically. Records are immutable by default, their fields are final. They are perfect for DTOs, value objects, and any class whose primary purpose is to carry data. Sealed classes give you explicit control over a class hierarchy. By listing the permitted subclass in the sealed declaration, you tell the compiler, these are the only classes that can ever extend this type. No surprises, no external extensions. This enables exhaustive pattern matching. The compiler can verify you have handled every possible subtype in a switch. When this program runs, execution starts from the main method inside the main class. The program demonstrates 4 modern Java features, which are var for local type inference, switch expressions, records, and sealed interfaces with pattern matching. Before the main method begins, several types are defined at the top level. A record called point is defined with two components, x and y, both integers. A sealed interface called shape is defined that only permits to specific classes to implement it, which are circle and rectangle. Circle is defined as a record with a single component called radius of type double, and rectangle is defined as a record with two components called width and height both of type double. Records automatically generate constructors, getters, equals, hash code, and toString methods without any extra code. The first part inside main uses the var keyword to declare a variable called list. Instead of writing ArrayList of string explicitly, var lets the compiler infer the type automatically from the right-hand side. Two strings are added to the list, Java and 10. The print statement outputs open square bracket Java, 10 close square bracket. The second part demonstrates a switch expression. An integer variable called day is set to 3. The switch expression evaluates day and matches it against the cases. Since day is 3, it matches case 3 and the arrow returns the string Wednesday. This returned value is directly assigned to a string variable called dayname. The print statement outputs day: Wednesday. Unlike traditional switch statements, switch expressions use arrows instead of colons and do not need break statements. The third part creates a point record object called p using new point with the values 3 and 4. When p is printed directly, the automatically generated toString method of the record outputs point open square bracket x equals 3, y equals 4 close square bracket. Then p.x and p.y are called, which are the automatically generated accessor methods of the record, and the print statement outputs x: 3, y: 4. The fourth part creates a shape reference variable called shape and assigns it a new circle object with a radius of 5.0. A switch expression is then used with pattern matching to check what type of shape the variable actually is at runtime. Since shape is a circle, it matches the case circle C, where C becomes a pattern variable that holds the circle object. The expression then calls c.radius to get the radius value and builds the string circle radius 5.0, which is stored in a string variable called desc. The print statement outputs circle radius 5.0. If shape had been a rectangle, it would have matched the second case instead. After all operations finish executing, the main method ends and the program terminates. Thank you for watching this video. I hope this explanation helped you clearly understand the Java 8 Plus features and its core components in a structured and easy way. Continue learning, keep practicing, and stay consistent with your preparation. More detailed concepts are coming next.